to know. We use this so much in college algebra and really every math class from here on out. At this point, you just need to learn this, memorize it. So big star next to this, this is one thing you just need to know. Does everybody have that written down? So, in order to use the quadratic formula, you first have to rewrite it so that it is equal to 0. So, what would we do?
Add 2.
Mm-hmm. If I tried to do box method with this one, would it work? No, there's no numbers that multiply to 2 and add to -4. So box method wouldn't even be an option. Completing the square would work. And it wouldn't be too difficult to do there. We can also do the quadratic formula. So for the quadratic formula, you need to know your A, B, and C. What is my A value? B? And C? Okay. So quadratic formula. X equals the opposite of B. So that would be 4 plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. So we're just plugging into the quadratic formula. Now we are going to simplify this as much as you can. Unlike in Algebra 2, a lot of times we just had a decimal answer. I don't want decimals. I want radicals, so I want exact answers. So don't put it in your calculator, the whole problem, you won't get the answer I want. -4 squared is 16, minus 4 times 2 times 1 is 8, over 2. So that gives me the square root of 8. Am I done?
No.
No. What could I do?
Get your root.
Well, first let's break down the radical, and then we'll take out our 2. 8 breaks into a 4 and a 2. The square root of 4 is 2. And now, I have 2 terms on top, but they are both divisible by 2. So we can simplify that. And we get 4 divided by 2 is 2, plus or minus 2 radical 2 divided by 2. It's just the square root of 2. Any questions there? I'm going to give you guys lunch try, and we'll compare answers after that. So here's yours. Formula, it doesn't matter a bit. So you could write it as 2x squared minus x plus 4 equals 0, or if you have negative 2x squared plus x minus 4, you're going to get the same thing. So for the way I have mine written, x equals opposite of b. B is -1, so it would be positive 1. Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4. My a is 2, my c is 4, all over 2a. So that gives me a 1 minus 32. So I get a negative 31. Can you reduce radical 31? No, but what do I need to pull out of that? An I. Since it is imaginary, I do want you to do standard form. So the first plus or minus I radical 31 over 4. So because it's the I, go ahead and separate the two of them. The A plus BI form. Any questions there? Do I need to do another quadratic formula? Yes.
I'm not getting
do one more just for fun. Okay. On this one, what do you want to do first? Okay. So we have negative 3x squared minus 2x plus 5 equals 0. So the way mine's set up, my a is negative 3, my b is negative 2, and my c is positive. Of course, if you didn't like that, you could multiply everything by negative 1 if you felt like you wanted a positive a squared. It's not going to make a bit of difference. So x equals the opposite of b would be a positive 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. No. Okay, so negative 2 squared would be 4 minus negative, so plus 60. I get the square root of 64. What is the square root of 64? 8. Okay, can I just make this like 10 over negative 6 and negative 10 over negative 6? No, you have two separate problems. You have to do 2 plus 8 divided by negative 6 and 2 minus 8 divided by negative 6. So 10 over negative 6, negative 5/3. This would be negative 6 over negative 6, which is positive 1. So we've seen 3 different types of answers we might get. We might get 2 nice answers like this. We might get 2 imaginary answers like this, or we might get 2 answers with a radical in them, like the first one. What part determines what our answers look like? Whether it's a real number, an imaginary number, a nice one, or if it still has a radical? Right, it's that thing under the square root. Okay, if that's a negative number, you get the imaginaries. If it's positives, we get reals. If this is a perfect square, then our final answer is just nice values. If it's not a perfect square, then you have those irrational ones. So there's actually a term for this. That is called the discriminant. And sometimes it's useful when maybe I don't really care what the whole solution is, I just care what type of solution I'm going to get. So that is our discriminant. So the doesn't include the radical, it's just the b squared minus 4ac, just the portion under the radical. And there are really 3 cases. If that number is positive, we get 2 different real solutions. Now, those might be rational, or they might be irrational. The rational would be like the problem we last did. So it's rational if it's a perfect square, because the square root will go away. It's irrational if it is not, because you'll still have that perfect square, or that square root in the final answer. If the discriminant is equal to 0, so what happens is you get something like 5 plus or minus 0. Well, 5 plus 0 and 5 minus 0 are the same thing. So if it's 0, you get one answer. It's repeated. It comes up both times. And if that number is negative, that's when you get the imaginary answers. So sometimes I'm just going to say classify the solutions. So all you have to do is the b squared minus 4ac and look at what kind of answer you get. My direction said find a number of real solutions. We might kind of classify them a little bit as we go. So let's just talk about the number of solutions to this. So if I ask you anything about the solutions, the number or the type, I am asking you just to do the discriminant. There's no need to do the full quadratic formula. We just care what would show up under the radical, because that's the piece that determines what our solution looks like. Make sure it's equal to 0 first, which it is. We can see here our A is 3, B is -5, C is 1. So if I do my discriminant, that's just B squared minus 4AC. So -5 squared minus 4 times 3 times 1. So my discriminant is 13. What does that tell me about the types of solutions?
2 unequalness.
Right. So we get 2 real solutions, 2 different real solutions. If I asked, would this be rational or irrational? That means you're going to have the square root of 13, and we can't break that down, can we? So this would be irrational. The Math Excel sometimes asks you to classify them as rational or irrational, which is why I want to include that extra piece. Okay. Let's look at the next one. What would I have to do first here? Alright, subtract our 1. It doesn't matter that we have fractions. So we have 3/4 s squared minus 1/4 s minus 1/2 equals 0. So my discriminant, b squared minus 4ac. So my b is -1/4 squared minus 4a is 3/4, c is -1/2. Check my math. Did you guys get 25 over 16? Okay. That's a positive number. So are my answers real or imaginary?
No.
Real. It's not 0, so that means we have 2 real solutions. Okay, would this one be rational or irrational? Rational. This is a perfect square. You can do the square root. So what that means is in the actual quadratic formula, the radical disappears and you get nice answers.
What if only the denominator?
Then it would be irrational. So if you couldn't do the square root of both top and bottom, it's irrational. All right, you guys do C. Over. So b squared minus 4ac. So you get 16 minus 24, which is -8. That is negative, so it tells me 2 imaginary answers. And if it's 0, it would just be 1 repeated answer.
Wouldn't that still give you the square root?
Well, the discriminant itself doesn't include the square root, but yes, if you did the full quadratic, you'd have the square root of a -8, which is why it's imaginary. The discriminant is defined just to be that piece under the radical. All right, are we okay with the discriminant?
Yeah.
Okay. Last thing that we need to do today, very brief, I just want to take some equations and see if we can solve for a variable. Okay, so just manipulating equations to get a variable by itself. So if I wanted to get d by itself, what are your thoughts? multiply the 4. Okay. So we would have 4a equals pi times d squared. I'm trying to get d by itself, so we would. So I have 4a over pi equals d squared.
Now you do the square root.
Yep. Typically when you add a square root, you add plus and minus. So if I haven't told you anything about what this equation stands for, you might still do that. This is actually talking about an area, and d is representing diameter of the circle, so in this case it couldn't be a negative. But if I didn't tell you what those variables represented, then you could go ahead and include that plus and minus.
Would it be wrong if it didn't?
If I didn't tell you what I just told you, that this was for a circle, then that would be okay. If I do tell you that, and you know that diameter distance across the circle can't be negative, then we would leave it out.
Okay.
Okay, let's try a couple more. This one is actually representing volume. R is a radius, H is a height. So could we have negatives on this one? No, you can't have a negative radius or a negative height. Okay, so I want to get R by itself. What's the thing that makes this look ugly?
No wonder.
The one. Well, I mean, it could be. I guess that's kind of a personal opinion, what makes it ugly.
Pi?
But the pi, yeah, there's a lot of stuff. But probably that fraction is the first thing that I notice that I probably need to deal with. How could I...
Multiply by 3.
Okay, multiply by 3.
Can you divide pi and h at the same time?
Yes, you can. So I have 3v over pi h equals
Square.
So then we would square root. Plus and minus if I didn't tell you what the variable stood for. So r is the square root of 3b over pi h. Let's do, I'm going to give you guys one, and then we're done. This will be our last problem. We're just going to do this one. And I'm not telling you what the variables stand for, so it could be positive or negative. So this is a positive 3w squared, so you subtract it. They are not like terms, so you just leave it as 4z squared minus 3w squared. This is like negative 1t squared, so divide by negative 1. So you have t squared equals negative 4z squared plus 3w squared. Get rid of a square, you need a square root. Since I didn't tell you what t was, go ahead and assume it could be negative, so you get plus and minus. Square root negative 4z squared plus 3w squared. So it's just like solving an equation, but you aren't getting a number answer because there's a lot of variables involved.
So you don't take out the I or...
No, because the whole thing isn't negative. Okay, so that is the end of today's piece. Tomorrow we still have another portion of this section that we're going to cover. The assignment is another Math Excel assignment. So I think this one's like 9 questions. Majority of them are just quadratic formula practice. So you've got some time now to work on that and ask for help over this or the previous assignment.